community regarding family building options, egg freezing. I'm joined with Therapy Fertility's Dr. John Kennedy, who is going to give us some in-depth insights into the reciprocal IVF process, what therapy offers, just general guidance on family building, family planning, and he's going to discuss the benefits and considerations of egg freezing, and in general with the aim of kind of empowering individuals to take control of their reproductive futures. There will be time for questions from the audience as well. We already have some questions that have come in from social media throughout the last number of weeks, but if you do have any additional questions while we're going through the webinar, please just pop them on Zoom and we'll do our best to get to them at the end. So to begin, Dr. John, I might just ask you to give yourself a brief introduction and your experience.
So first of all, thanks for having me. My name is Dr. John Kennedy. I'm the Medical Director of Therapy Fertility. I've been an obstetrician and gynecologist since, and every time I have this little speech, it gets longer, since 2000. So I've been working in the field for 24 years, give or take. I've been doing exclusively fertility work and working with IVF and IUI and things like that since about 2012. We opened Therapy Fertility in 2021. If I got that wrong, they'll kill me. So we just celebrated our 3rd birthday recently, just with the aim of making kind of access to fertility services a bit more transparent and accessible and affordable. And so far, thanks be to good God, has gone well.
And yeah, so I'm coming into this with a lot of questions myself. I'm not super familiar with the process, so this is going to be a learning experience for me too. But the first question we have and the place we want to start from is kind of what are the first steps that same-sex couples can take when considering reciprocal IVF?
Well, when considering reciprocal IVF or indeed fertility testing or treatment at all, I mean, your first step is, and I suppose this applies to the LGBTQ plus community as much as it does to anybody else, testing is key, fertility awareness is key. Knowing what your fertility potential is, I think, is really important. I think it's something that gets really understated in Ireland. I think our sex education has been historically limited, and people being aware of their own fertility potential, especially with respect to egg numbers and egg quality, is really important. But assuming assuming you're now in a situation where you're thinking about starting a relationship and you're in a situation where you're going to be using something like donor sperm, your first key step is to have a conversation and start getting testing done, and see where your fertility potential lies. When you see a single woman by choice, or you see a same-sex female couple come through, sometimes there can be a little bit of almost barrier to kind of getting standard testing done, because these people aren't patients, they're clients. You're coming in for service acquisition. You're not coming in with a monkey on your back with a history of infertility or subfertility. But because fertility treatment is really expensive, and I don't just mean that financially, I mean it physically and emotionally as well, it's really important that we do the standard test to make sure we're doing the right treatment in the right way for the right people, even if they don't have a history that would suggest, oh, why would I have a problem with my tubes? I've never tried it. Yeah, granted, but if we're going to be using them and you're spending thousands of euro on donor sperm, then it's really important that we make sure that. So getting your testing done, getting the results of that testing, and then especially with respect to something like reciprocal IVF, sitting down and talking through your options. We try not to be ignorant about this, but when you have two women sitting in front of you, you essentially have 2 bites of cherry. You have 2 sets of fertility panel results. And you might want to look at things in a number of different ways, not just with respect to, if we do this, does this have a higher chance of success than doing it another way, but what do they want as a couple? And exploring those options is obviously much more critically important. Getting people to understand what's involved in reciprocal IVF, what reciprocal IVF is. It's IVF. IVF is stimulating ovaries to produce eggs, getting as many eggs as you can, taking those eggs and making embryos. Those embryos are then owned jointly by the couple and can be transferred to either party within that couple until such time as their family is complete or they've no embryos left. And that's what, so the standard way of thinking about reciprocal IVF is taking eggs from one partner and putting the embryos back in another. But it doesn't always go that way. Sometimes the first transfer might be there and the second transfer might be there, or the first pregnancy is there, and then once somebody's pregnant there, you try over there. So and it works. It's very elegant experience.
And you kind of briefly touched on there, maybe single parents who want to conceive as well. Is it much different for them, starting point wise?
Medically speaking, the process is obviously very simple. It's how are you going to get pregnant? And I suppose there's two ways somebody can get pregnant when they're using something like donor sperm. One is intrauterine insemination, and the other is IVF, plus or minus reciprocal IVF in that framework. IUI, or intrauterine insemination, is the process of stimulating the ovaries to produce 1 or 2 eggs, triggering the release of those eggs from the follicles within the ovary, and then putting sperm in at the top of the womb, shortening the journey the sperm has to make to get to the egg. It's reliant on the sperm being of good quality, which it will be because you're buying it essentially, and it's reliant on the tube being open, and that's why it's really important to check that in advance if you're considering doing that. That's IUI. IVF is stimulating the ovaries at a higher rate, so you get more than 1 or 2 eggs. You get as many eggs as you can. That number is very variable depending on your own personal circumstances and results. Taking those eggs out, making embryos by leaving eggs and sperm in a dish together, growing those out for a number of days, and then transferring one and freezing the others, or freezing them all sometimes and then dispersing them on its own. IVF is, generally speaking, substantially more successful than IUI. It would want to be. It's more expensive, not just financially, but physically and emotionally as well. But it can offer a faster, more efficient route to pregnancy and childbirth than IUI. A lot of people will come in assuming they should do IUI because there's no history of infertility, right? There's nothing wrong with it. Why wouldn't you do IUI? It's simpler. One of the challenges with IUI, and you can certainly do it, is the cost of the donor sperm. Donor sperm is really expensive wherever you get it. Makes it a little bit less efficient given the relative success rates, but it's something we'd always talk to you about, and if it's something you want to do, absolutely we can.
And if we're looking at the egg freezing process, what medical considerations should people have?
Egg freezing, and then you're talking about people who aren't trying to get pregnant at all. You're talking about fertility preservation now. So the principle behind that is as you get older, both the quality and quantity of your eggs decline. So by stimulating the ovaries and taking eggs out, eggs that were going to be lost that month anyway, it's really critical you're not stealing from the future. You're holding those eggs in time, you're freezing them and giving yourself an option should you run into problems down the line. You do testing, but there are 2 absolutely vital questions to try to ask and answer of anybody contemplating egg freezing. The first question is, based on your results, how many eggs do you think we're going to get? And we bake some blood test results, scan results, gives us a flavor. Are we going to get 5 eggs, 10 eggs, 20 eggs? We did a bunch of egg collections today. What were the numbers like? One person got 34 eggs, one person got 6 eggs, one person got 19 eggs, one person got 7 eggs. So you'll see the whole spectrum there. And the second question, and arguably the more important but more difficult to answer question, is, are these eggs any good? Now, people are always rocked back on their feet by this, but most eggs are terrible. We're not fertile creatures at all. So if I take an egg from somebody who's maybe 30 years old, and I try to turn that egg into an embryo and turn that egg into a person, it has about a 3.5% chance of getting all the way to live birth.
Okay.
But now, so that's a terribly low number. That means if you've got 10 eggs frozen, maybe you've got about a 35% chance of having a baby, 20 eggs, about 70%, which is suddenly looking a lot better. So how many eggs do you think we're going to get? And based on your age and your history, are they any good? Egg freezing, people who are coming in for egg freezing are looking to preserve something for the future. So you have to be really clear about the potential challenges that can be associated with that, the pitfalls, the pros, the cons. Is it worth them doing? Will they have to do this more than once to build up a decent bank of eggs, depending on what you think you're going to get? So they know exactly what they're getting into as much as we can possibly tell them. But it's a really good idea. If you know you're going to be using donor sperm down the line, then you could take those eggs out and make embryos with them and freeze the embryos. You'll have less embryos, but they'll be of more proven value, and they'll probably freeze and thaw a little bit better as well. So that could be a good idea. But I remember talking to somebody about, it was about a year or 2 ago, and she came through looking for egg freezing, and whilst we were in the consult, she was gay, so then in the future she'd be using donor sperm. And this was a shock. I said, oh, well, would we consider using donor sperm now? But she quite appropriately pointed out to me that she would want her future partner to have a say in the choosing of that donor sperm as well. So, yeah, so I think you have to be considered that too. But if you've got, I would have gay couples, two women come in and they know they don't want to get pregnant now. So talk about fertility preservation. For them, it makes perfect sense for them coming through as a couple to make embryos, you know.
And you touched on the success rate there of kind of the egg freezing. Would that be reflective of success rates of IVF?
Yeah, so as I said, we're not fertile creatures. Natural conception rates for heterosexual couples having intercourse where everything is grand and dandy, probably about 17% chance per month of getting pregnant. And that's not having a baby, that's just getting pregnant. So it's always lower than people think. What you try to do before you, after the testing, but before you embark on a cycle of IVF or reciprocal IVF, is based on the test results, based on their history, based on their age and other factors. You try to give them a very, as accurate as you can, idea of what their chances of success are. And it's like the highest success rates will go, cumulative live birth will probably be about 70%. The lowest it can go is, look, there's no floor to this. It could be 1%, it could be 0.1%. Like there's people out there who bite your arm off if you say you've got a 12% chance of getting success. Well, let's not fool ourselves. That's not a high number. A 30 to 35, 30 to 32-year-old woman with a healthy ovarian reserve and nothing else wrong could probably reasonably expect a 60%, if not higher, live birth rate overall from a completed round of IVF or reciprocal IVF.
So I guess it's kind of fair to say that there's no one size fits all approach to this. It's unfortunately not that straightforward.
No, it's not, and I think that's you sort of see people's eyes widen as they go through it. You have to try it absolutely dependent on their history and on their test results and on their age when they come through. Age is by far and away the most critical factor, unfortunately, when it comes to success or failure in fertility treatment. So it's different.
Yeah, we've talked about some of the kind of biological, I suppose, challenges and things like that. Are there any specific legal or logistical challenges that same-sex couples in particular might face?
So the CFRA Act was enacted in 2015. This is the piece of Irish legislation that allows intending parents to go on the birth cert. So what happens is you fill out some various pieces of paperwork as consent forms as you go through the process, as you do fertility treatments, be it an IUI or an embryo transfer, and then after the child is born, you get to register the birth cert, and then both parties get put on the birth cert. Very powerful piece of legislation, and it's great, and it gives people rights, and it was very progressive. It also will disclose to the child when they're 18 that they were conceived potentially with the aid of donor sperm in this instance. So that's the piece of legislation around that. That's pretty robust. It's been around for a while. We're all pretty used to using it. The other piece of legislation, which I'm sure some of your listeners want to know about, is around things like surrogacy, and recently the Assisted Health Reproduction Bill got signed into law, but it hasn't been enacted yet. There's a whole pile of stuff that needs to happen. There's a lot of uncertainty still around in that surrogacy space that will hopefully become clear. I'm sure most of the people watching this know, if you go onto the LGBT .ie website, publications, there's some really good forms of retrospective and prospective surrogacy, both international and domestic. I can't give any huge clarity at the moment on this. This progress is happening, but it's not there yet.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there are resources out there like LGBT Ireland's website, lgbt.ie. There's organizations like Irish Gay Dads, Equality for Children, who are doing great work with that kind of stuff. And I suppose we've talked about some of the challenges, and as you've said, it can be kind of a taxing process emotionally, financially. How does therapy kind of support its clients going through these things?
So, I mean, you look at the three costs of any fertility treatment: financial, physical, and emotional. talk about everybody assumes the hard part of fertility treatment cycle, like IVF, is the injections and the scans and the egg retrieval and the embryo transfer. I ain't saying that's easy. It is very hard and there's lots of challenges associated, but it is a walk in the park compared to the back end of a cycle. Waiting to see have your eggs and early embryos turned into viable embryos after implantation. Has it worked? Have you got a positive pregnancy test? And there are a few things more devastating than negative fertility treatment. And I mean, even the best possible fertility treatment is still not a certainty. So a lot of the time it doesn't work, and even more often it doesn't work the first time, and it's a process, and it's a marathon, not a sprint, and that can be incredibly difficult. So anybody using donor sperm has to do one session of implications counselling, but we have therapeutic counselling as well, and we're here to answer any questions as you go through that. And the way we work, we try to put an awful lot of resources online, because when you talk to somebody and you fire a lot of information at them, I've known this gig for a while. You can see their eyes blank. I mean, it's all white noise. So writing that stuff down afterwards, or giving them access to that, both in written and video format, allowing them to kind of absorb it at their own rate, is really, really important. One of the main barriers to entry for couples who are subfertile or need systems of donor sperm is cost. It's financial. We don't want to say that now. Hey, great news. We now have public funding IVF. For the gay community, we don't, and you'd love to see that progress. You'd love to see people who need donor sperm be included in that, and that's only right, and I hope to God it happens soon. We have tried, we aren't free. We have tried to make this as accessible and affordable as we possibly can. The margins here are lower than any other clinic I've ever worked in. And we're trying to get easy. The initial nurse consultation is free, so you can come in, you can do that, you can get information. You don't have to progress if you don't want to. We work with the vast majority of the insurers, and we have payment options and partners. I think it's Hum who can help support it as you go through monthly payments. You can still have your treatment and pay for installments after that. So the final thing on that is every penny you spend in a fertility clinic, in any fertility clinic, you can get 20% back on its tax rebate at the end of the year. And people oftentimes don't seem to know about that, which is crazy to me, because it can add up. It can be really, really significant. So we do try to, on some level, acknowledge that that is a major barrier. And we're trying to keep, especially the reciprocal IVF and the egg freezing, we're really, really trying to hold the line on that and keep it as affordable as possible, because I think they're wonderful things to do.
And as you mentioned there, Therapy does offer free consultations. So if anyone is interested, if you're interested beyond this chat and finding out more or starting your journey, you can find links to book your free consultation at Therapy's website. So be sure to check that out. As you were kind of discussing there, it is obviously financially challenging. You did mention a few ways in which people can, the 20% tax that you can claim back and stuff. Are there any other financial assistance or insurance options that people
so I mean if you have private health insurance, a lot of the private health insurers will help in some way. Generally, a lot of them don't cover the cost of a whole cycle, but they'll cover a chunk of it. So that's something. Okay.
And at this stage, I would just like to also invite people again to send in your own questions. I know, as we've kind of already mentioned, this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. So if there's anything you would specifically like to know, do send those in and we'll get to them at the end of the session. So I suppose we've talked a lot about the challenges so far, but I think we have to remember that at the end of this, hopefully at the end of a successful journey, there are so many.
I have to check myself, because my natural inclination is not to be optimistic about somebody's chances, because you have to be realistic, you have to be transparent, you have to be honest, and really start kind of present the worst rather than the best. And then bear in mind what I do. I see patients who are coming through for the first time, or who are coming through having not had success, because people who have success, they might come back and show us the need, but I'm not seeing them in consultation as often because they've had success. So you almost forget about them to an extent in the sense of the work you do. But the vast majority of couples and of women who embark upon fertility treatment will succeed. Not necessarily the first time,
Yeah.
but they will get there. And especially when you look at the gay community, because they don't have that history of infertility, because they are clients, not patients. That in turn makes me even more kind of, okay, we're gonna be, because it's very easy to get carried away and go, listen, look, you're both 32-year-olds, you're gonna knock it out of the park, it's gonna go brilliantly. And that kind of over promising, that can really bite you in the ass on the back end. But at the same time, in your heart, I think this is a company we can get success with. And with something like IVF or reciprocal IVF, if things are going well, there's a decent opportunity that maybe you could make a lot of embryos, and that's not just one child. Potentially, they're held in storage and they're frozen, and that's your family locked in for the next while your second job. And it's been 3 years now, as I said, so we're starting to see a lot of women and couples come back, having had success, to use their frozen embryos for their second, or in some cases third baby, which is still lovely to see.
Yeah, and yeah, so we've touched about, or we've touched on reciprocal IVF and egg freezing and IUI.
Yes, yeah.
Are there any other methods that maybe same-sex couples should know about family planning, or are they kind of?
That's kind of it, really, to be quite honest. Because you're using donor sperm, you need to do that via either IUI or IVF. One thing that you can't do in Ireland, or at least not legally, is home inseminations. Okay, you can't buy donor sperm and do a home insemination and get pregnant. Well, I mean, you can, of course you can. You know, and I think we all see the documentary on Netflix at this point. You know, you can buy your sperm off Craigslist if you want. It's just not a good idea. The downside of doing it that way, aside from the obvious downsides, is that then you aren't eligible under the legislation to both be recognised as parents. The only way that can happen is through fertility clinics, unfortunately. I would love to see a mechanism whereby single women or gay couples could do home inseminations, could buy and get donor sperm from bonded, reputable sources and do home inseminations. And if that doesn't work, come in here and we'll do IVF. You know, that would make a whole lot of sense to me. But that, I mean, I've been talking about that for years, but I haven't really got anywhere else. It's just a shame.
Yeah, maybe someday.
Someday, yeah.
And yeah, so I've mentioned it more than once already, but this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. So what personalized care options does therapy provide to its
Well, I think we've touched on it, and I think it really is about coming in and in the first instance listening. Okay, what do you want? What do you want as a one? What do you want as a couple? What do you want as a person coming through? And then doing some testing, seeing what we can offer. This is what we have. This is what we think the associated success rates are. And then making sure this notion of informed consent, this notion of us working with you within the parameters that we have to try to get you across the line. It's very rarely a case that I will say to anybody, you can't have treatment. There has to be something quite extreme medically for that to be the case. It's not my job to tell you that you can or can't do it. It's my job to make you sure you understand. Look, this is probably likely to be successful. This is probably likely to be not successful, or not the first time. There's going to be bumps and difficulties along the way, and so that you're making an informed choice based on your individualized, personalized results. I think that's absolutely key, and it very much is the core part of what we do. Communication. All problems can be traced back to not having communicated correctly at the front end. What might happen at the back end, and there's so much information that you can't possibly just dump it all on something. I remember back earlier on in my career, when we didn't have the technological resources that we have now. We didn't have online portals and instant messaging back and forth and video consents. Asking people to get any kind of understanding of what was going on based on those really, really quick interactions, it's absolutely pointless. So people are going around not having a clue what's going on. And that way they're not involved in the decision-making process, which I don't think is fair or appropriate.
And yeah, I just want to see, have we gotten questions from our viewers? Okay, thank you very much. The first is, Is it usually possible for trans men to freeze their eggs after starting testosterone? If so, how long would you need to stop taking testosterone for during the egg freezing process?
Really good question. So one thing I meant to talk about, and I'm really glad that came through, was fertility preservation for trans men and trans women. So for trans women, very straightforward. You can freeze sperm relatively easily before you start, and freezing sperm is pretty easy. You give a sample, produce a blood test, check the sample, freeze it, locked in, right? For trans men, freezing eggs can be a bit more challenging. We've had a few patients come through who have done, and to be fair, they've all gone on really well, I think. I think they've done brilliantly, but it can be a slightly bigger ask. Some people might have had a long-standing history of sexual activity or something like that, so it can present more challenges. Testosterone is something we don't know a whole lot about. There was one study done out of America a number of years back, which looked at trans men who had been on testosterone and looked at their outcomes after IVF for egg freezing. And it was very positive. It looked really good. And the suggestion was, well, hey, maybe testosterone doesn't have the negative impact that we thought it did on eggs. Now that flies in the face of what we understand about testosterone and its impact on eggs. And it was a small study. So I'm hesitant and twitchy about fertility preservation or IVF in people on testosterone. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I'm saying we don't have any kind of clarity on what the success rates might be in this space. At the same time, taking somebody who's been on testosterone, taking them off testosterone, not just taking them off their testosterone, but putting them on the entire opposite, like you just the pendulum swung completely away. It's a big ask. It's a big ask. So I think it's an area we haven't gotten to grips with fully yet. And I think as time goes by, we'll do a bit more work. We'll get a bit more research out on it. But I do like the idea, and I've had various talks of people who are thinking about starting testosterone, who are thinking about transitioning, of freezing eggs and potentially freezing eggs with a view to reciprocal IVF down the line. Like those eggs aren't necessarily going to be made into embryos, they're going to be transferred back into you, they might be transferred back into a subsequent partner, So there's several things we can do in that space as well.
And then the next question is, can your weight impact a woman not being eligible for treatment?
Yes, it can. So in the public funding space, your BMI needs to be below 30 to be eligible for publicly funded IVF. We don't have BMI limits here. I know some clinics do. We don't. What we do have is an honest and robust conversation about the impact that BMI can play, both in success rates, response to sedation, response to medication, access to the ovaries, and very importantly, risks in pregnancy. So again, we're very transparent about that. We bang all of that out for you. But if we can reach the ovaries and if we're accepting of this, it's historically, I think fertility clinics have been poor at managing this. Telling somebody, and people who are overweight hate engaging with healthcare services because they just constantly feel fat shamed, and it's not helpful. It's no good. It's no good at all. So working with them proactively, saying, look, how much time do we have? How do we get weight down? If that time takes to bring the weight down, is that going to have an impact on your chances of success? We talk about all of that. We'll treat you like you're a human being.
And I've got a kind of couple of similar questions. So if a first attempt is unsuccessful, is it the same price to try again, or some of the costs absorbed by the first attempt? And then someone else has also asked, does the approach of the team change if you have unsuccessful attempts?
Love those questions. So if you have embryos frozen, it's so much cheaper and easier to use a frozen embryo than it is to make a fresh one. Okay? If you don't, if you've done a cycle and it hasn't worked, you've got frozen embryos, we transfer a different embryo. We've got embryos frozen, we do that. If we've completed a cycle and you've made no embryos, or we've transferred one or all the embryos and it hasn't worked, then we should sit down and have a chat. An IVF cycle is as much a test as it is a treatment. It's a test of your egg and embryo quality. So we look at, see where did it go right, where did it go wrong, what can we build on? Are your success rates going forward the same, better, or worse? What are our lines of attack? So yes, absolutely the approach could change, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe we just build on what works, and progress from there. But we should always have a conversation after a completed cycle before embarking on another one to make sure we're doing the right thing.
And someone else asked, is there any general idea of timeline you can give?
Oh yeah, I mean, like quick. is that we pride ourselves on not having waiting lists. So if you contacted us tomorrow and said, I want to have a nurse consultation, you could probably be in next week having a nurse consultation. Generally takes a couple of weeks to get all your testing done, and then you're waiting another couple of days for a medical review with myself or one of the other docs here. After that, if you want to get into treatment, you need donor sperm, you need to do your counselling, order your donor sperm. Donor sperm takes about 2 weeks to get in, not long at all. And then you could be in cycle within a month or so. So quick.
Another person has asked, are the medications included in the all-inclusive price?
No, but the good news on that is that everybody in Ireland is eligible for what's called DPS card, Drugs Payment Scheme card. It means that no household pays more than, I think, €74 per month for medications. So these medications that would cost maybe 2, 3 or 4 grand, depending on the dosages, will only cost you €80.
Oh, okay. And then I think maybe we might finish on this question. From what I can see, everything else has kind of been answered. But somebody just said that they were 30, single, and so nervous about making an appointment. Is there any kind of encouragement you can give to people who are a little bit nervous to come?
Well done, even putting that out there.
Yeah.
Just well done, because nobody in their right mind wants to walk through the doors of a fertility clinic. It sucks. It sucks having to come in and talk to me. So, and it's also really, really, really scary asking questions. Don't ask questions if you don't want to know the answer. And so many people over the years shy away from checking their fertility because they might get told something they don't want to hear. The only thing I can say to her, say to everybody else, is that if there was one common thread that I could pick out from the literally thousands of couples and women I've seen over the last decade, that they would all agree with this: if they had known then what they know now. They will all, and the children born of couples who have struggled to conceive or needed help will be fertility aware in a way that nobody else is. So you're 30, you're young, you're healthy, there's probably no problems at all. Coming in and having a chat, having testing does not mean you will have treatment. Doesn't mean you'll have treatment. Nobody's going to upsell you or push or do anything. We are trying to give you agency, control, and options. Do yourself out. And of course it's scary. Should look, nothing worthwhile is easy. So the scariness is a good thing, not a bad thing. So I would really, really encourage her to take the plunge, get the testing done, at least get some information, then sit on that for a while. We're here if you have any questions.
Yeah, knowledge certainly is power. You know, you need the information as your starting point. And as we mentioned, therapy fertility clinics have free consultations that you can book, so be sure to do that. Like, there's no harm coming in for a chat to discuss your options, get more information, and from there you can decide what you want to do. There's no pressure to continue with treatment or to take any of the treatments. It's really just to give you the best information that you can get so you can make a decision for yourself. But yeah, I think that's all that we have time for today's webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining on. John, thank you so much for all of the information you shared with us. I know it's really, really valuable for so many people, and getting this information out there can be great in helping same-sex couples, single parents, and really any couples in building a family, which is something that I know so many people have an ambition to do. As I have mentioned, you should, if you're interested in learning more, go on to Therapy Fertility Clinic's website, book your free consultation, and come in and have a chat and figure out what your options are and how you can move forward with family planning. Just for a reminder, my name is Alice Linehan. I'm the editor of Gay Community News GCN. I was joined with Dr. John Kennedy from Therapy Fertility. And thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for your questions, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.